Welcome to Zoe Stories. A plastic surgery mistake turned me into a girl. My name is Alex, and at 28, I had always thought I knew who I was. I grew up in a small town where everyone had their place, and I fit into mine. A regular guy who worked a 9-to-5 job, hung out with friends, and did what was expected. But deep down, I was never truly comfortable in my own skin. I always felt a disconnect between the person I saw in the mirror and the identity I carried inside. It wasn't that I hated the way I looked, but something about my face, my body, the way I presented myself, always felt off. So, like many others, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I chose plastic surgery. I wasn't trying to change everything, just a few tweaks to make myself feel more at home in my body. I'd researched everything carefully, had the consultations, and settled on a nose job to improve what I thought was a disproportionate feature. It seemed simple enough, just a small alteration, but when I woke up from the surgery, nothing was the same. My nose was exactly as I had requested, but my face had changed drastically. My jawline had softened, my skin was smoother, my frame had shifted. I didn't look like the person I'd seen every day for 28 years. It wasn't just a cosmetic change.
I was no longer the man I had been.
I was someone else. And suddenly, I had to face a terrifying truth. I didn't know who this new person was or how I could live in their skin. What did this change mean for me? And was it even possible to find my way back? When I first caught sight of myself in the mirror after the surgery, I thought I was still groggy from anesthesia. My mind was clouded, foggy, and unable to grasp what my eyes were seeing. It couldn't be real. But when I blinked and the reflection didn't change, panic set in. This was no accident, no trick of the light. This was me, but it wasn't. The face staring back at me was a woman's face. Soft, delicate, with features that seemed more suited to a feminine form than the man I had been just hours before. I reached up to touch my face, my fingers trembling as they traced the curves of my cheeks, my lips, the line of my jaw. It wasn't my face. It wasn't the one I had lived with for so many years. And yet, it was mine now. Every curve, every smooth line, felt like an alien part of me. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of shock, horror, and confusion. Was this a mistake? Had the surgeon messed up? I tried to tell myself it was just a temporary shock, that the swelling would go down and everything would settle. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about aesthetics. This wasn't something that would go back to normal. I had changed. The face I had tried to improve had transformed into something unrecognizable, something new, and I was left wondering if I could ever feel whole again. The internal battle began immediately. Part of me wanted to fix it, to return to my old self, to erase this mistake and go back to the life I'd known. But then there was another part of me, a tiny voice buried deep in my chest, that was strangely curious. What if this was an opportunity? What if this change wasn't a curse, but a chance for something I had been longing for, an opportunity to redefine myself, to step into a new identity that had been buried under the surface all along? The idea was terrifying, yet exhilarating. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Should I go back to the surgeon, ask for an explanation, beg for them to undo it? Or should I accept what had happened and face a future that was now uncertain and terrifying? Would I ever be able to accept this new version of myself? Or was this my nightmare come true? For the next few days, I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone what had happened. I sat in my apartment, staring at the mirror, hoping that I'd wake up from this twisted dream. But each time I caught sight of my reflection, I was greeted with the same woman's face. The same features that felt like an intrusion on my life, my identity. My phone sat on the counter, untouched, as I stared at it. I knew I couldn't keep this from my best friend, Emily, forever, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her either. How could I? How could I explain this? Would she think I was crazy? A failure? A fool? Eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I texted Emily, "Can you come over? I need to talk." When she arrived, I tried to keep my cool, but the second she walked into the room, her eyes widened in surprise. I could see the immediate confusion in her expression, then the flicker of concern as she tried to piece it together. "What the hell happened to you?" she asked, her voice soft with disbelief. I messed up, I stammered, my voice shaking as I spoke. I had surgery. I thought it would fix things. But now it's like I don't even recognize myself. I didn't expect this. Emily stood there for a long moment, scanning my face, as though she was trying to find some shred of the person she knew. This isn't what you wanted? No, I replied quickly, but the truth was more complicated than that. My heart ached as I said it, but I felt a strange, impossible weight lifting when I admitted it. But it's happening. I don't know what to do now. I don't know what to tell you, she said, pacing in circles. This is huge. But maybe it's not all bad. Maybe you don't need to fix it right away. You can take time to figure out how you feel. Her words sounded comforting, but they only deepened the knot in my stomach.
Time.
I didn't have time. I was running out of time. The more I stayed in this new body, the more I felt the weight of it all pressing in on me. My reflection was the most intense reminder of that. I kept thinking about the life I had before, the one that felt so familiar, safe, and comforting. But now, who was I? The person I saw in the mirror wasn't just physically different. I could feel it in the air around me, in the space that used to be mine but now felt foreign. As the days passed, I started to notice the changes that had already begun to settle in. The compliments. The strange way people looked at me, smiled at me. The uncomfortable attention. I had once been invisible in a crowd, just another guy. Now, I could feel eyes on me constantly. I could hear their whispers behind my back, and the discomfort churned in my chest. People were treating me differently, and I didn't know whether to hate it or embrace it. Emily's voice cut through my thoughts. You have to decide. Are you going to let this ruin you? Or will you find a way to make peace with it? I froze. The weight of her question hit me like a ton of bricks. Was I truly going to let this define me? Was I going to become a person who couldn't accept their own reflection? But just as I was about to respond, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced at Emily.
Who's that?
I asked, my voice tight. She shrugged, just as confused as I was. But when I opened the door, my stomach lurched. Standing there was the last person I expected to see. I think we need to talk, he said, his voice calm but filled with something unreadable. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart hammering in my chest. The surgeon, the man responsible for this catastrophe, was standing right in front of me, looking far too calm for someone who had just completely changed my life. What do you want? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Anger mixed with fear swirled inside me as I stepped back to let him in, not sure what I was expecting from him. He closed the door behind him, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm sorry about what happened, but we need to talk about how to fix this. I blinked. Fix it? The words hit me like a slap, even though they were what I had been hoping to hear. But now, hearing them from him, after everything, made the urgency of the situation feel even more real. Fix it, I repeated, trying to keep the edge from my voice, but failing. You want to fix it? You're the reason I'm like this in the first place. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and looked down. I know. And I'll do everything I can to make this right. But what did that even mean? Make it right? Could anything really fix this? Could I go back to the way things were before? Or was I forever stuck in this body, this new life that wasn't mine? My thoughts spiraled. Could I trust him to do anything right this time? If I let him fix it, would I risk even more drastic changes? Or was this my chance to start fresh, to find a new path and embrace the unknown? The decision weighed heavily on me. What if this was my new reality? Could I handle it? Or would I be forever haunted by the ghost of who I used to be? The first change came slowly, almost imperceptibly. It started with the clothes I wore. The surgeon, despite his assurances, had no magic solution to make everything right again. The physical changes, the curves, the softness, the features I could barely recognize, had begun to set in, and no amount of makeup or hair dye could disguise what was happening. I had to face it. I was becoming something I hadn't chosen. I stared at myself in the mirror, studying my reflection. The face that stared back at me seemed unfamiliar, even alien. My jawline was softer, and my eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held a kind of vulnerability I wasn't used to. I reached up and touched my hair, now long and silky, falling to my shoulders. I ran my fingers through it, feeling the delicate strands slip through, each touch a painful reminder of how much had changed. I could see the slight rounding of my hips through the loose fabric of my shirt. My hands trembled as I placed them against my sides, feeling the change in the shape of my body. My chest felt different too, heavier, fuller. It wasn't just my body that had transformed, though. It was the way people looked at me now. At first, there had been confusion and shock. But now, people looked at me with curiosity, pity, and, sometimes, a silent judgment I couldn't escape. The shift wasn't just physical. My mind had begun to change as well, slowly, almost as if my thoughts were being reshaped by forces I couldn't control. In the silence of my room, I wondered if this was my new reality, a world where I was no longer recognized as who I used to be. The question gnawed at me.
Who was I now?
Was I really becoming someone else, or had I already lost myself? I tried to reach out to a few friends, but each call felt like it took more energy than I had. When I spoke, the words were somehow different, less sure of themselves, softer, more hesitant. I hated that I had to adjust. Every day felt like I was walking through a fog, unsure of what was real and what was just my mind playing tricks. Then, the first time I stepped outside, the weight of it all hit me.
People didn't recognize me.
The world had changed too, in subtle, unsettling ways. I was no longer the person I had been before. I could feel it in the way they looked at me. I could feel it in the way my own reflection felt like a stranger. But there was something else there too. Beneath the confusion and fear, there was an odd sense of liberation. With each passing moment, as I moved through my days in this new skin, there was a strange freedom in shedding who I once was. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The confusion was still there. What had happened? Why had this happened? But the more I lived with this new version of myself, the more I began to question whether I could let go of the past. Maybe this transformation, painful as it was a chance to redefine who I could be, not just physically, but in every sense. Every day was a challenge, but it was one I had to face. I couldn't run from it anymore. This was my reality, and somehow I had to find a way to live in it. It was the first time I'd gone out without trying to hide. No layers of oversized clothes, no hasty makeup to disguise what had become unmistakably me. The city was buzzing, full of its usual noise and movement, but today, it felt as if every step I took was under a magnifying glass. The air felt thick, charged. I could feel the eyes on me, and the weight of their stares pressed down like a heavy blanket. As I walked through the crowded street, the reality of it all began to settle in. People didn't just glance at me, they looked at me. Some with curiosity, some with open judgment. And I could hear the whispers behind my back. The familiar humiliation churned in my stomach, a tight knot that wouldn't loosen no matter how much I tried to ignore it. I'd spent so many months avoiding this moment, hiding from who I had become, but now, there was no escaping it. I turned a corner, trying to lose myself in the crowds, but there he was, Ethan. My best friend from before. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me, his eyes scanning my face with disbelief. "Is it really you?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it felt like a shout in my ears. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected him to be here, and certainly not like this. I wanted to run, to vanish, but I stood rooted to the spot, caught in the moment. "It's me," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, unable to suppress the lump in my throat. "It's still me, Ethan." He took a tentative step toward me, his face unreadable. There was a flicker of something, sympathy, horror, in his eyes. The silence between us stretched on, suffocating. You look so different." "I didn't expect," he started, but his words trailed off. I don't even know what to say. The truth hung between us like a weight neither of us could bear. "I don't either," I said, my voice cracking as I fought to keep the tears at bay. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose any of this." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze softening. But this is you, right?
Who you are now.
And I'm not going to walk away. His words hit me harder than I expected. There was a warmth in them, a kindness that made the whole world feel just a little bit less alien. The tears I had been holding back spilled over, but this time they felt different. It wasn't just grief, it was relief. Maybe this was who I was now, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. In that moment, I understood something. The world might not have changed, but I had. And as painful as it was, I realized that I could either fight against who I'd become or accept it. With a shaky breath, I straightened up, wiping my eyes. I don't know what the future holds, but I think I'm ready to face it. Looking back, the person I was before this transformation feels like a stranger. I had been obsessed with controlling how others saw me, keeping a mask firmly in place to fit the mold I thought I was supposed to. But now, after all the uncertainty, fear, and heartache, I've learned something I didn't think was possible. The real challenge wasn't the physical changes or even how others reacted. It was learning to accept myself in this new form. When I first saw myself in the mirror, I saw a stranger. But over time, I began to see me, not the body, not the image, but the person inside. The journey wasn't about getting back to who I was before, but discovering who I could become. Ethan's words echoed in my mind as I walked through the city that day. It wasn't just about acceptance from others. It was about accepting myself. The fear I once had of rejection seemed less overwhelming when I realized the most important relationship was the one I had with myself. I'm not sure what's ahead for me, whether I'll ever fully understand why this happened or what it truly means for my future. But the one thing I do know is that I am not alone. I have the courage to live authentically, no matter what the world may throw at me. There will be challenges, yes, but I'll face them with my head held high, ready to discover what's next. Maybe the hardest part of all this was letting go of the old me. But in doing so, I finally found the courage to embrace the new one. Thank you for joining us on another captivating journey through Zoe's stories. Remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale. Until next time, keep exploring, keep imagining, and keep believing in the magic of storytelling. See you in the next chapter.